All right, and we are back. And so I want to thank Crystal Fitzsimons, Pauline Steinhorn, and Deja Vaughn for coming on to the podcast. I hope that you learned a lot from each one of them. Um, with Crystal, I greatly appreciate the work that she's doing to make sure that um, hunger in America is addressed. Again, we're sitting here acknowledging the fact that there is a human being on the planet that is worth $1 trillion, and yet there are people in that same country in America that are trying to figure out what they're going to eat. So I'm glad that there are people like Crystal Fitzsimons out there that it's working to make sure that hunger in America is eventually eradicated. And then Paula Steinhorn, a beautiful person who wrote a beautiful book about her mom and her grandmother and how they survived the Holocaust. It is really, really a good book. It's really well written. And even though Pauline basically says she was more of an editor than a writer with this, the way that she composed it and put it together, you feel like you were there and you could feel the emotions and the pain that her mom and her grandma went through. So I encourage everybody to do that. And Deja Vaughn, beautiful spirit, beautiful sister that, as you could tell from the interview, very thoughtful, very creative, and down for the cause. And that is the name that I believe you will hear, not just in the Atlanta area, but nationwide down the road. She is an embodiment of Black millennials as far as how they process the history that we've been through, and as far as the mindset of what direction this country should go, right? So I've been communicating with the sister for a number of years, and to finally get her on the podcast is really, really a treat. So I thank all three of those young ladies for coming on. I want to read something to you because it's relevant to what's been happening the last couple of weeks in the judicial system, dealing with young Black men. And it was written by this woman named Karen Fleshman. She's an attorney, and we're connected on LinkedIn. But she wrote a commentary. Haven't been able to get on the podcast yet, but we'll see how that works out. But she wrote something that caught my attention, and I wanted to share it with you all. She said, 11 years ago this month, I published White People. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. In response to a white man's massacre of 9 beloved community members of Mother Emanuel, a Black church in Charleston, South Carolina. It grieves me to this day that in their final moments on this earth, they welcomed him into their Bible study. I thought then that this horrific hate crime would cause white people in mosques to look ourselves in the mirror and change. I thought in particular white parents would endeavor to raise better children. 11 years later, even after the mass uprising of 2020 and anti-racism books read, here we are. Last week, a jury acquitted Rick Chow of murder in the death of Cyrus Carmack Belton, a 14-year-old Black boy who was running away from Chow's store, shot in the back over a bottle of water he did not take. Yesterday, a jury in Frisco, Texas, sentenced Carmelo Anthony, 19 years old and Black, to 35 years for the death of a white teenager after a fight at a high school track meet. The prosecution struck every Black juror who could have sat in judgment of him. The jury that remained needed less than 3 hours. After all the book clubs and black squares and promises, a Collin County courtroom still could not seat a single black person to weigh the life of a black child. This is what I meant when I said part of the problem. Not only the men who kill, the ordinary white people who build the rooms, fill the juries, raise the children, and call it neutral. Austin Metcalf's family lost a son, and I will not diminish their grief. But a system that can't imagine a black teenager as anything other than a threat is not justice. It is the same fear that has been killing black people for 400 plus years, wearing a robe and calling itself the law. And the only way that fear ends is if we white people recognize that it is wrong and not feel it anymore. Stop teaching our kids to feel it too. 2026 will be half over in a few days. By June 30, you can take tangible steps toward becoming less racist. Not someday, not after the next verdict that breaks your heart. Now. Again, that was Karen Fleshman who wrote that. And, like I said, when I saw that and read that, I was like, perfect. That's how it's supposed to go, right? But, Ms. Karen, I just want you to know that as much as I agree with what you're saying, and as much as I hope that your hope comes true, I know that it's really, really a reach, especially in the South, to develop that kind of mindset, that progressive mindset that's needed to do what needs to be done. I say that because, I don't know why I even still follow this person, but, he's not the only one, but it's just, this mindset that tries to continue to justify the unjustifiable, that continues to defend the indefensible. And, people want to say, well, there's no such thing as white privilege, but it happens each and every day. The news reports it each and every day. And whether you want to acknowledge it or not, that's based on the bubble that you live in, the ecosystem that you listen to and live in and dwell in. But that denial is not the reality that's here. And then some would even try to flip it and say, well, black people have privilege. And it's like, I don't think you understand the definition of privilege, right? So in the case, where people miss out, they're like saying, well, he did stab the kid, and why did he bring a knife to a track meet, and yada, yada, and this, that, and the issue is that a system allows, in this day and age, in the 21st century, allows a jury to be sat, and not one of those people are from the community where the defendant lives, right? Or is a part of, to think that it's okay to try to charge a young man with murder and not have one black person, not one, sit on the jury. And then, we talked about this last week about the prosecution going for the home run on Chow in South Carolina. Well, this prosecutor did the same thing in Texas, but he made sure that he had a jury that would do what he wanted to do. And the scary thing is that if it was the other way around, it was this young man Metcalf who killed Mr. Anthony, it would still be an all-white jury, and Mr. Metcalf would have the same result as Mr. Chow. That's what black people are upset about. You know, we're not encouraging our kids to carry knives around white people. We're not encouraging our kids to get into fights. If anything, we're trying to discourage them from engaging in such a way that they could get in trouble with the law, because we understand how things work, right? And it doesn't matter if the town is majority black or whatever the case may be. You don't want your children getting caught up in a situation where law enforcement is involved, one way or the other, right? We don't want them being arrested, and we sure don't want them to be a victim. And that's a fight that we as black parents had to fight all the time. Doesn't matter if the parents don't like each other. Doesn't matter if the parents are in the same house or not. If you have a black child, you have that fear, right? You have that concern, because you don't want anything harmful to happen to someone that you love. And as a black parent, and having black parents, I understand that totally. But other folks don't get it. And I think that in order to get it, you've got to get out of this bubble. And when I'm sitting here, and I've been paying attention to a lot of historical documentaries and just watching the dynamics of the politics taking place this year, there seems to be a correlation with the South and prejudice. Now, you don't have to be a political scientist. You don't have to be a real scientist. I say real, but you know what I'm saying. Somebody that's into biology or chemistry or mathematics even, to see this pattern that has happened in the United States, where even when we were forming the country and putting together the Constitution, we were trying to appease the southern states. That's where the 3/5 compromise comes from, because the South didn't want to pay property taxes because black folks were property, right? They didn't want to pay higher property taxes because they had all these slaves. But at the same time, they wanted to be rewarded for having this population so they could have political power. And so they came up with the idea, well, we're going to consider slaves 3/5 of human. That way, they're not treated as citizens, right? But they're human enough where the property taxes for these southern planters, these rich plantation owners, wouldn't increase that much. And that was the buy-off to get the southern states to sign off on the Constitution, right? So ever since the beginning of this nation, we have had to capitulate to southern white men, especially powerful southern white men. And that led all the way through till the 1850s, when it was coming to a head and all these new states were coming in. We had to create this Mason-Dixon line, right? the Missouri Compromise line. So any state north that was admitted to the Union of that line was a free state, and anything south was a slave state. And of course, as we went further west, that line wasn't as straight, right? Because folks were making money, and they didn't want to give up that money and that power, right? And then even after a civil war, where the North, the Union beat the Confederates in the South, right? You still had a movement in the South that was powerful enough to influence political thought in the North. The Birth of the Nation movie, the United Daughters of the Confederacy putting statues everywhere and memorials for Confederates. And it's like anywhere else on the planet where there was a civil war, the losers were not memorialized. Even if it wasn't civil war, even if it was a takeover, once that dictator, once that authoritarian regime was removed, so was any symbolism of that, right? We've got people still alive when the Nazis were running Germany. And if you go to Germany now, there's no Hitler memorials or Goebbels or anybody else. There's no swastika statues in certain parts of the country, because they wanted to get rid of that symbol and that vestige. They know it's a part of their history. Can't erase that. There's film, there's books, everything. But as far as day-to-day life and moving forward, they went past that, but not America. Somehow we romanticized that, this Confederacy and the South will rise again. I mean, I was growing up, Dukes of Hazzard, right? The rebel flag on the car. The car was called the General Lee. It's been a part of our culture. And we've tried to embrace it. I mean, college football, we talked about the most dominant conference is the SEC, the Southeastern Athletic Conference. It's all inbred in America. If you want to win a national championship, you're probably going to have to beat a team in the SEC to get there. It's looking like now in baseball, that's what's happening. Every now and then in basketball, that's what's happening. These are teams in the South, right? So when the NAACP or anybody else says these folks want all white men to be elected officials, then maybe you really should have all white men playing football. It used to be that way down there until a few of them coaches saw some of those black athletes playing against them, said we might need a few of them on the team, right? So, it's just always been, Hee Haw was like the most popular show, right? The Grand Ole Opry, that's in the South, that's in Nashville, right? And that's all that was. Hee Haw was basically the Grand Ole Opry on national television every week. Same thing. So the South has always had this incredible romantic hold on the United States. But the dangerous part is the politics. It's one thing to embrace country music or even the blues for that matter. It's one thing to embrace barbecue and all that stuff. But it's a whole nother thing to embrace the racism, right? If there's one part of Southern culture that needs to be eradicated, needs to be ignored, it's the racism. That's got to end. This country is going to move forward. And there's a little correlation with that. It's like how many Southern, in modern times, since the Civil War, how many Southern presidents have we had, right? People say, well, Virginia's in the South or whatever. In my lifetime, there's only been two. Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. You've had Southerners run. Lindsey Graham ran for president, right? Ron DeSantis ran for president, right? George Wallace ran for president. Strom Thurmond. But none of them won. Al Gore didn't win. Now, George Bush beat him, so you had two Confederate states, having candidates. And, outside, Texas, if you count Texas, then you got Bush, the Bushes, Lyndon Johnson. So, outside of Texas, you don't get that many, if any. So that's kind of a backhanded way, and especially as Democrats, right? So that's kind of a backhanded way society has said, well, it's all right for y'all to do this and to influence us on that and how you deal with black folks, all this stuff. We don't necessarily want you to be president, all right? But then you get a president like a Ronald Reagan or a president like Donald Trump that does everything they can to cater to whatever that Southern white political thought is, right? And I know that's a generalization. Living in Mississippi, living in Georgia, I know there's good white people in the South. I know that. But they tend to run as Democrats, and they tend to get their brains beat out. Georgia is changing because of Atlanta. Period. Outside of that, there's no other equivalent to Atlanta in any other southern state. The only thing that can happen is what's happening this election year, and that people are just frustrated. And, when they get tired and they just say, well, look, man, I got to vote my wallet this election. I think I read a quote from Einstein to Mr. Simons, an empty stomach is not a good way to dictate politics, but that happens. And we're going to see a shift in the House and in the Senate after this midterm. But will we see change? There's a difference. You see the parties switching, and 1 minute the Democrats are in charge, the next minute the Republicans are in charge, but where's the change coming from? And that goes back to this whole concept of the South. I like sweet tea. I like fried chicken. All those are Southern traditions, right? What I don't like, the one Southern tradition that we need to stop practicing, is racism. And once we get that out of our system, once we get that drug out of our system, America will be so much better. Because when you go to places where activism and progressivism is more powerful than racism, you see productive activity, you see growth, right? That's why Atlanta is an anomaly. Charlotte, right? But people are trying to take it, they're trying to claw it back. They're trying to get us, as they say, the good old boys, and just say, you know, that just ain't right. What ain't right is thinking that a belief system that enslaved people, that segregated people, that dehumanized people should be romanticized, glorified, and continued. Right? Because, you know, people say, well, we need to make America great again. And the black community said, we just need to make America great. Because if you have a mindset that the only way America can be the best is that white people are in charge, that's not a winning strategy. We are losing our standing in the world because of that mindset. For those people who don't believe in the Bible and all that stuff, I get it. But those of us who do think Jesus is going to show up any minute now because all the stuff in Revelation is happening. War and pestilence and plagues and all this stuff. That's a curse. It's not a concept. That's not a culture. That's a curse. And until we break that cycle, we're never going to be what we should be. Every child in America should be valued. Everyone. No matter their economic status, no matter their ethnicity, upbringing, whatever. Because that's our future. That's our investment as human beings for the next generation to be better than what we were, right? But because we're caught up in this culture of privilege and isms, we are literally seeing back-to-back generations that are not doing better than us. They're struggling. You heard Deja talking about what's the most pressing issue? These student loans, right? Then you got someone go, well, I didn't get a student loan. You didn't go to college. So why are you even in that discussion? Well, I got to pay it back. How? We've had this discussion before. If I say the debt no longer exists, then the debt no longer exists. It's not a burden on you or me. It's over with. Well, that's money that we lost. No, that's an investment. Dwight D. Eisenhower said that student loans was part of national security. That's how he created the program. You've heard me say that. That's fact. He wanted student loans for people to be in STEM because in his wartime military experience, he saw technology up close and personal. He dealt with those Germans who had built the Autobahn and were building rockets and the latest in air warfare and tank warfare. That's what we were up against. We just beat them because we mass produced what we could. We had the manpower and the willpower and the buy-in. But we weren't technologically advanced. That didn't happen until we made the investment in NASA. And John F. Kennedy said, we're going to the moon. And now Elon Musk is a trillionaire because we advocated that to private industry. All I know is this. We got to be real about who we are. We got to look in the mirror like Ms. Fleshman did. And we've got to change our ways. We got to change our mindset. And when we do that, I promise you, when we do that, America will be amazing. It'll be beyond great. It'll be amazing. But we got to get people to buy into that. We got to get people to believe in that. We got to instill that in our children. Don't teach them fear. Teach them hope. Teach them promise. You don't have to give them participation trophies, but you do have to instill in them that there's good in the world, and we need to embrace that and not clutch to the pearls of fear and prejudice. We need to do better, so we won't have outcomes like Mother Emanuel or Tops Grocery Store, right? Or Carmela Anthony or Cyrus Carmack Belton. We don't. Emmett Till, George Floyd. We don't. Sandra Bland. We don't need those anymore. This election should be the foundation for us to truly move forward. And there's some people that are not perfect, which is basically everybody running. But people not perfect get elected, okay. But if they buy into the vision of what America should be, we'll be on the right track. Again, Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder, but his words are what freed them. We can do better. We have shown it. We've got a 250-year track record of how we've steadily made incremental progress. Now is the time for the next 250 years, take it to the next level. All right, that's all I got. Thank y'all for listening. Until next time.